For over 100 years, when Oceanside residents wanted to get news about their community, they turned to the local newspaper. In the 1970s, that changed, and they could turn to their local television channels. 20 years ago, they called it LO, or local origination. Today, we call it community television. And the building behind me is where it all began. Now it belongs to the Blade Citizen, but in those days, it was headquarters to the first cable company in Oceanside, home to little old Channel 3, one of the most sophisticated community channels in the entire country. Hi, I'm Tom Reeser. I'm the Executive Director for Oceanside Community TV, the community channel here in Oceanside today. We've taken hundreds of the old 1-inch tapes that have survived from those early days of community television, and we've combined them with interviews with some of the early cable pioneers. KOCT is one of the most respected and prolific community channels in the county, but we would now like to gratefully pay homage to one of the most ambitious community channels in the entire country. So let's take a look back at the first Oceanside channel.
Now, Arthur.
When it comes to TV, we're not ABC or NBC. We're just little old cable, Channel 3.
Depending on where you lived within the community, you could get Los Angeles or you could get San Diego, but rarely could you get both, even with a high antenna. And sometimes there was a lot of snow, and the picture reception wasn't that great. Some areas had great reception, of course, but there were pockets all over town where you could only get one or the other.
In those days, it was very nice to have an antenna on your roof. That means you could afford a television set. Today, the idea is to get that off, but that means you can afford cable.
A gentleman came in my office who was an executive with Time Life magazine empire, and he first asked me if I could give him the names of about 5 people in the community who were leading people around the town, and I did that. And he came back a second time for some more, and when he came back the third time, I finally said to him, exactly what are you up to? His name was Bill Hayes, and he said, well, I'm representing Foot Cone Belding, a major advertising agency, international agency, and we're building a cable television system here. And he said, would you like to be part of it? And I said, I most certainly would, and that was how we got started.
And it was in those days, people say, what do? You say, I'm in cable television. And you didn't want them to hear.
Cable was relatively new at that time. Cable as we now know it. There were master antenna systems around the country, of course, for individual settlements and whatnot, or groups of homes. But for a city cable system, it was fairly new, I think. We were called TV Power of North County, and subsequently Oceanside Cablevision. But our corporate name was TV Power of North County. I'm not going to be able to name all of them, but Wayne Gibson, who was in the grocery business, was one of the group. Rob Walwick, who was an attorney. Clarence Steves, who was primarily in savings and loan at Oceanside Federal at that time. Walt Whitman, who had been, actually he'd been working for the ranch at Camp Pendleton before it became a camp, and he too was in the financial world. Bob Kolb was a radio repair business here in Oceanside. My remembrance is there were 3 groups, counting ours, who wanted that franchise, and it was pretty stiff competition, I can tell you. The Federal Communication Commission hadn't at that point either had not totally accepted the thought of cable, or certainly they hadn't made it easy for cable operators to build their systems and in effect go on the air, although it's not on the air, of course. So channels 6, 8, and 10 in San Diego gave us fits. They didn't want us to get this system activated at all. And although we pleaded with them, we met with them, we did everything we could, we were not being successful in getting it started. We had laid some cable, or strung some cable, but we still weren't able to hook up customers. One of the other 2 competing groups was built around KUDE, which is now KGMG, and the principals involved in the station are no longer here, actually, but they had watched what had happened, and of course were disappointed they didn't get the franchise. So they went to the city council and said, now these people have had this franchise for, I believe, 2 years at that time. I'm not certain the exact length. And it's time they started paying some revenue to the city. They're not doing anything. We suggest that you take the franchise back and have a new competition, and perhaps we'll give the nod to KUDE. Well, one of the things we had done in seeking the franchise was to give an advance payment of royalties or franchise fees that would have come to the city. This actually was $50,000, which was one heck of a lot of money in 1968. We had given a cashier's check to the city as part of the franchise, and so things took their natural course. KUDE was upset about our not having paid anything. The city then decided they'd have a new hearing. We came to the hearing and said to them, we've already paid you $50,000. And the answer was, no, you have not. So we said, we suggest you go back and look somewhere because you've got the check. And we showed them a photocopy of it. Well, as it developed, that check had been in the city clerk's file for 2 years, not drawing interest, not doing anything. And we knew they had it, but they didn't know they had it. So that ended the debate, and we kept the franchise. Foot-Cone did a magnificent job of putting our proposal together, and I think they, except perhaps for myself, I think they chose wisely for the people in the community that they selected to be on the board. This was a broad cross-section, older and younger people who had been involved in businesses as well as professional life, and we prevailed.
So I came into Oceanside. They were looking for someone to do a public relations job for them because they were going to try to rebuild the system, and they needed to get approvals on ratings, they needed to get wiring, and they need telephones, telephone pole access, and just an awful lot of things. And they needed to try and keep the public in check as much as possible, because you tear up streets and you tear up time, and you maybe have people off for a little while you're cutting in lines. And so it was a hectic job, but it was a lot of fun, and I've never regretted coming back to Oceanside.
I got in cable back in the late 60s. Mainly I was working for the phone company. I had this great dream that I wanted to work in television. And lo and behold, I saw an ad in the local paper said that there was a Newport Beach Cablevision opening up, and they were looking for people. So at this time I had already left the phone company. I was just going to school at Orange Coast College. So I decided, well, gee, I want to give it a shot. So they hired me right away as an installer. So I came down here in late 1969, and they moved my wife and I here, and they bought me a new truck, and they promptly told me, well, we don't have the cable system built yet. You're going to have to work in Irvine. So I ended up spending the next 6 months driving up to Irvine every day.
And I'm not sure just exactly when we activated the system, but it was right about 1970 that we actually got the system activated. And within a year or so after that, we had the studio going with our own origination. We were offering 24 channels in those days, and that was a lot of channels. That was the most that any system was offering in the late 1960s.
The cable guys came to our house to sell us Oceanside cable. It's a beautiful blue coats, you know. And
that's right. Our salesmen were
right.
Blue coats.
They came in, and it was like, well, you know, it's going to be time to get a color television. And the mall had just opened up, Plaza Camino Real, and my dad thought, well, we'll go buy a TV, Penny's, J.C. Penney's TV. So they came in and sold them cable service, $4.75. There were no premiums. It was like, you could expect almost 26 channels in the future. Right now we have about 13, but in the future it's going to be awesome.
Well, at that time we were still working for Foot-Cone and Belding. They were one of the largest advertising agencies out of Chicago, and they were very much into television production. And so when they built cable systems, they made a commitment that they would build one of the best local origination stations that were in existing at that time.
Foot-Cone, being the type of organization that it is, Foot-Cone and Belding, an international ad agency who dealt with major clients all over the world, actually, didn't do anything halfway. It had to be the best. And I think our studio, maybe it was even better than it should have been because it was an expensive way to go about having a local origination. But we did it, and it cost a lot of money.
Oceanside's Cable Channel 3 brings you TV's biggest dial. Thousands of Oceanside families have recently discovered that cable TV is probably the greatest invention since TV itself, because it brings them, for the first time, not just 2 or 3 channels, but 24. So when you hear somebody say, "There's nothing good on TV tonight," you can be pretty sure that he or she isn't an Oceanside Cablevision subscriber. Some subscribers tell us Channel 3 alone is worth the cost of Cablevision. But just to be on the safe side, we give you 23 others.
We started out here what we call Channel 3. And I was very fortunate to have a young man working with me by the name of Bill Sinatra. And Bill was very enthusiastic and very knowledgeable. I also had a chief technician named Jay McDonald. And he could fix anything electronic, and he knew his business very well. So that was a blessing.
We built a studio in our offices, which was down near where the Blade Citizen is located presently. It had been Wayne Gibson's market, and he went out of business, and we bought the building. We built a studio with 2 cameras. We had all the mixing apparatus. I'm not a technician, so I don't know what you call them.
I think it was the first color LO in local origination station, maybe in the country. I think they promoted it that way.
We did shows with people in the community who were just similar to what you do on your Oceanside view. But we also brought in rock bands. We did some crazy things, and we had a lot of fun doing it, but we just had a lot of people who at that time who were real interested because cable was so new. Here was a chance for them to do something. And we brought them in and we did all we could.
The people that I've had feedback from during that time were all excited about it. And it was fun to see somebody on there that you knew and to hear things about the community that you didn't realize were there. We did not, as you're doing, cover the city council meetings, however, but we tried to bring Oceanside to the people through Channel 3, and I think we did a pretty good job of it.
And the station was doing a lot of programs. They did, well, we did the high school sports, and we also did talk shows, and we also did a children's show called Casey the Keystone Cop. And at that time, the gentleman did Casey was stationed at Camp Pendleton. All of a sudden, he got orders, and he had to leave, and they had to get somebody for Casey. Well, bingo, a little light lit up in my head and said, hey, this is a big opportunity. Back in my high school days, I used to do a little drama, mostly a lot of little kid production type things, and I said, I can do it. So I convinced the station manager at that time, which was Lyle Smith. I said, Lyle, if you give me an opportunity to do Casey and also put me on as a full-time engineer, and I'll do Casey for you, is the way it worked out. And after a little bit, they finally agreed to that, and that's how I originally got involved in the station.
And we had live programming over Channel 3, I think it was in those days, a whole variety of programs. We had children's programs, a cartoonist who would show the kids how to draw pictures, etc. We had bingo. We had exercise programs for the ladies. We would broadcast the election returns when they came in with the big chalkboard and keeping a running tally of who was beating whom in whatever they were doing. We even went out of the studio for events that were held elsewhere. For example, we filmed basketball games, football games, parades, and at one point we even took our remote cameras up to the Western White House in Orange County, or almost in Orange County, on Camp Pendleton.
When you do these shows, they cost a lot of money. The equipment especially. And there was a loss to the cable companies, you see, because they were not bringing revenue in. And it was a very expensive loss to them. So I would have to fight almost every month to be sure and get the thousands of dollars I needed to keep us on the air. And these guys then would work their little fannies off and work day and night and not put in overtime or anything else because they loved it.
Our budgets were being cut. So we were looking into volunteers, and the source for volunteers at that time, I was looking for, well, I'd say high school.
And then we went out and hired, or didn't hire, we asked for volunteers from the schools, and we take in very capable young men, those that really were capable. We'd give them instructions, and we'd also give them manuals to read to improve their minds and things like that. And several of them did very well, especially Mike McDonald. He did tremendously well. He's still in the business.
My dad knew Phil Franklin, and he said, well, Phil and I, the Rotary Club, And I'll mention it to Phil, see what he says. So he bounces it off Phil, and Bill bounces it off Bill Sinatra. He says, we got this kid, and Bill says, well, it's somebody that breathes air. It's probably good. He has fingers and everything, right? Okay, I'll take it on. And that's how it started. There were no rules, basically, and I worked for this guy, and he'd just say, you want to learn about that? Here's the book. I'm going to turn you loose on it. You want to have a radio show this afternoon? Okay, you write a script, you can have a radio show every Wednesday afternoon. I'll tell you, it's real interesting. Most of the people, going back to when I worked with Bill, everybody wants to be in video at a television station. They all want to be a cameraman, they want to be a director. And when I came in, there were still some paid positions at the cable station, and so those people were the camera people and the directors and the technical directors, but they always needed audio guys. They always had the need for audio guys, and I was a volunteer, and I was, you know, 12, 13 years old when I started, so they said, well, we're going to train you to be an audio guy. And so I diligently took that on as a task.
Anyways, although the cameras, the early color cameras we had weren't anything like what we're using today, they were our cameras were 3-tube Vidicon, and so they didn't work too great in real low light, but they were still color, and it was better than what the black and white that was being used, I think, at KOCT and I think in Escondido at that time.
It was really good gear. It was bulletproof gear. It was, you know, there's still stuff. The hardware, we had about I would guess $100,000 Colortron grid, full lighting.
We were blessed with having a film chain, and this consisted of 2 16mm projectors and 2 slide projectors. And this offered us many opportunities in producing programs by dubbing film to tape and also slides. That was probably our only method for going outside the studio in color, was taking the 35mm slides and then coming back to the station and producing PSAs and even commercials.
Just get together, having fun, wearing a smile, laughing at the sun. It's people together, people who care that make Oceanside Federal Savings. It's the people together who care that make Oceanside Federal.
When it comes to savings, remember, savings accounts like children grow bigger daily. Oceanside Federal Savers earn highest interest with many free services. Today's children are tomorrow's hopes, and a savings account is tomorrow's hopes too. Save with Oceanside Federal Savings in Oceanside, Vista, Carlsbad, Fallbrook, and now Loma Santa Fe.
It's the people together who care that make Oceanside Federal Savings. Oceanside Federal Savings. Oceanside Federal Savings.
Everything we did that were graphics, we had press-type letters on a black background and an easel, and we had one of the old black and white cameras set up, and we had a little an art corner, and we had a light on it, and everything was just super. Dig this. They would type 3x5 cards in a regular typewriter, which would fit into a wheel which held maybe 24 of these cards, this metal hoop, and it had a camera stand in the middle of it.
Right, and the wheel would just
turn, and the wheel would rotate around, have fixed focal length lens on it, a little light bulb shines on the cards, and that was like the community bulletin board, you know. It was like Harbor Days, don't forget the Harbor Days, and the big joke for us was that there was a platform in there and flies would die and land on there. Phil remembers this. It would be like a word would come down from Phil, you know, guys, over the weekend I noticed a memo would come out, there was a fly, can we get the, you know, let's see if we can, Mike, can you deal with it, you know, Bill, come on now, let's go, guys.
Do you recall, Mike, how you used to get the weather? Yeah, we had this
it was more than just weather.
This little console, and it had different weather dials on it, and the camera would be looking at a mirror, and this mirror would pan around, and it would look at the...
But then the barometer would go off, and it would be like 110% humidity, or the clock would get off. But some of the great shows, we had the cable auction show, we had the cable cartoon show.
That was Captain Video.
Captain Cable.
Captain Cable.
Captain Cable.
Captain
he would tell stories and draw cartoons, and you know, you never really knew what the cartoon would turn out to be, and I'm not sure he ever did either. And see, for the for cable auction, that was a great show. we would go out and see Bill had these different tiers of sponsors. He would try to hit them up for the big bucks, like $200, complete VIP sponsorship, you know, like the whole package. Or if he couldn't get them to pop for that, like maybe they could go for 15, 20 bucks, he'd get them in on cable auction. And what that was, we'd get H Salt Fish and Chips, a $10 gift certificate to B. Dalton, 1 hour Martinizing, $10 gift certificate. So we'd have all of these wares.
722-1514, that's the number to call and place your bids on the tickets. Cable auction, may I have your bid, please?
The show would come on, and they would just, we had a couple phone lines coming in, and we had a patch, but we didn't use the patch. And people would call in, and he'd go, all right, we got H Salt Fish and Chips. This is the finest fish and chips on earth. And the guy would just sell, sell, sell. And then he'd open up the phone lines, and people would start calling in. So then, different times, Bill sometimes, but I was, you know, I'm a kid, I'm 13, I'm running audio, and they'd say, you know, we've only got $4 on this $10 gift certificate. It looks really bad. We're going to lose money on this. Call quick, call in. Bid it up a little bit.
Hi, just as we promised you last night, tonight at 7 o'clock on Cable Auction, this beautiful television set, a 19-inch Magnavox portable color set, and the stand, combination value of $474.90, goes up for bids at 7 o'clock. It's available to you on Cable Auction. Be there.
Of course, we did the high school football in a variety of different formats for years. At first, we shot it, and that was bizarre because I remember that was right. We were at the end of shooting it when I started. We were doing it in black and white, and these cameras needed so much light, the single tube black and white Vidicons, that you'd see a streak that you figured was a football player, and another streak was a football, and they would go like this and meet up, and then run off into the darkness. You go, whoa, what happened?
Of course, how we made up for that, Mike, is that we had the coach's corner.
Welcome to another Coach's Corner. The Pirate football season came to an abrupt end last Friday night when the Patrick Henry Patriots defeated the Pirates on the Vista High School field in the quarterfinal round of the CIF playoff action 21-14. When they started the public access channel, they wanted to do some local programming, and somebody came up with the idea of videotaping the high school football games and showing them back on a weekly basis. And at the time, I was doing a weekly radio show as a pregame show every Friday to the game of the week that was being broadcast on a local radio station. And so someone had approached me at that point about doing something to help narrate the films of the games, because they were showing those back, I think, 2 or 3 times during the week. And out of that, the discussion then led itself into, well, on Wednesday night, let's do a half-hour program where I would bring in a couple of players each week who had done well the week before, and in the process, show some of the highlights of the game and talk about the game and interview the players. And so that was the birth of the weekly half-hour program. Actually, the strange part of it that I didn't find out until 2 or 3 years later was that it actually worked against us somewhat, in that it was also broadcast into the Vista area, and some of the surrounding schools were coming in, looking at the games on television, taping them off, and using them as a scouting mechanism against us. So there were a lot more people watching it than we were aware of even at the time.
Bill had the bright idea one day. We had this great black and white truck, but he said, nah, black and white remotes, no way. We're going to go out, we're going to go do a color remote. And the first thing we did was that Miss Southern California beauty pageant out at
Maricosta College.
The new queen, Miss Oceanside 1974, is Mary Ellen Lloyd.
Of course, the reason I wanted to do this, just to go back a little bit, you know, we started hurting for money, and we were trying to get sponsorship, and trying to produce black and white programs just didn't interest too many sponsors. So.
Just doesn't have that snap.
Ladies and gentlemen, presenting Sing Out. Hey, look around you. What do you see? What do you hear? Hey,
remember, we're doing color remotes, but we had one camera because the other one had blown up. We had 3 total color cameras. One of them was on film chain, so that was locked down. We had no lens for it, or Bill would have detached it and brought it out.
That's true.
We had no pedestal and no lens.
I'm sure I borrowed parts from it at times,
oh, you
just
did,
to keep 2 cameras going.
I remember the big things the first year, the first couple months was we did that Miss Southern California beauty pageant. Then we went and we did the San Luis Rey Fiesta.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the 176th anniversary of the Mission San Luis Rey. It's brought to you this afternoon by West Coast National Bank with 4 locations to serve you. Stanley Dodge North, super dealer at 802 South Hill Street in Oceanside, and OTA, Oceanside Teachers Association.
On that one, we had a camera on a pedestal on top of the van.
Yes.
And it was like...
Very precarious.
Helicopter. It was like you just pan all the way around about 360 and then pan back. And then we did the Oceanside Parade.
Hi, and welcome to the coverage of the 1974 Oceanside Fun Festival Parade.
Bob Hudson was the announcer, and somebody else, I think Marty actually was doing was the color person on the parade. We had Stanley Dodge of North County, who is on the corner of Wisconsin and Hill in the building that's now where the U-Haul place is.
Right.
And we had the van about 150 yards south of that spot. Bill's down, we're huddled in this van, in this little tiny Dodge van. He's directing this thing, one camera. And he goes, okay, we got to go to a commercial now. And the camera would just swing over and get a wide shot of Stanley Dodge, and there would be a billboard that Stanley Dodge, your North County Dodge leader, and now back to your full color parade coverage already in progress.
And also we were involved in, out at La Costa, the Ross Martin
tennis tournament.
Tournament.
We had ambitions to go to Carlsbad with the system, obviously. They too were beginning to look toward cable, and we felt that we had a pretty good chance to get in there. One of our members, I believe, lived in Carlsbad at the time, one of our directors, one of our owners, in other words. But people were interested in the tennis matches at La Costa. They were interested in parades in Carlsbad, and we covered parades there, too.
The latter part of Channel 3 became one of the real interesting parts, and that's where we got involved in some projects. One of them was the Yesteryears of Oceanside. How that happened, did you remember one of your early teachers, I think Marion San Martino?
Oh, yeah, Mrs. San Martino, sure.
She called me up one day, just wanted to tour the station. And I had this thought that, well, maybe it should be more than that. Maybe we ought to do a little project. And out of the clear blue, I mentioned, well, let's do the history of Oceanside. And she seemed to really like that.
She was a bit of a local historian.
Good morning, Mrs. Elton. Good morning, Miss Martin. We're some students from Learning Lab class from Lincoln Junior High School, and we'd like to ask you some questions. Thank you very much for letting us into your home.
We understand, Mrs. Elston, that you graduated from the first high school class?
Yes, I did in 1909.
So I have to give a lot of credit to her because she really put the thing together. I mean, she wrote it out.
Yeah.
And her students were the talent, and then we interviewed some of the early pioneers.
Shot a lot of stuff out at the mission and shot a lot of slides. And
anyways, I just wanted to remind you, Mike, that that was one of the first awards ever given to a cable TV station from the California Teachers Association, so we were really proud of that.
Yeah, and you got to go up to San Francisco to accept the award.
They flew me up there, and I was
sitting up there with the networks, you know.
And I was seated at the table with ABC and NBC. Yeah, I remember that.
I remember when I started, it was still the tail end of having some budget for production. And within about 6 months to a year, Bill was basically relying 100% on anybody who would walk through the door and help. And whatever sponsor money he could get, he could put forward towards labor in, you know, at his discretion, but it really wasn't, there wasn't that much there. It wasn't a real feast. And then probably by about mid-1973, it was down to the nothing stage where we were just, it was all volunteers and we were out making it work as best we could. You have to remember now, you know, a camera is like smaller than a shoebox, and a CCU, you know, a camera control unit is in the camera. If it's external, it's tiny. But in those days, to have 2 cameras and in a full production format was a 9-foot-long, 19-inch rack console. It was huge, and so that led to the mouse invasion. I don't know what they wanted to eat in there, but when they got in, they had to go to the bathroom.
Yeah, right.
And when they did, smoke came out.
But
it was around Christmas time, and I think it was about 1973.
Right.
And we came back from vacation, and it was a bad deal.
It started out with one camera, and then it was the second camera, and then it was the third camera, and we were totally out of business.
We were out of business, yep.
It lasted as long as Footcone could support it. Those of us locally, I think there were 10 of us start out, 8 of us wound up actually as owners, part owners. We owned 20% in Oceanside. Footcone supported as long as they could handle it. We weren't asked to come up with any other funds. They were borrowing money to keep the system going and to build it, etc. And it's terribly expensive to string cable, as you already know. Plus the equipment that we needed, the trucks we needed, all those things. And so finally, Footcone reached the end of the line, and they ran out of funds, and they just had to do something. They decided to go back into the advertising business totally and get out of the other things they were doing.
Well, Footcone and Belding sold out to TCI in 1974, I think it was. And TCI was not as involved in providing the, at that time. Later they became the leaders in it. But at that time, they were not so involved in keeping the access channel going. And they just couldn't get the money that we needed to continue, like I was getting from Footcone and Belding. So we deteriorated, and we tried to do what we could do with what we had, and it wasn't really satisfactory. So we didn't do too much. We just did enough to stay within the legal limits.
There were tapes left. Unfortunately, they were stored in a warehouse down at the airport, and so there was
mildew and everything else.
There's not a whole lot left.
It's just, I'll tell you, it's an interesting business because there's always something new. There's always a challenge.
Well, as I said earlier, I think it was fun. I enjoyed doing it, and maybe more than the fact that we were bringing a service to the community that at that point they hadn't been able to have here. And I think that's basically it. We were just having a good time with it. We were doing something that was enjoyable. We never thought of the money side of it, frankly, although ultimately down the road I suppose it could have been profitable. It wasn't profitable when we sold, of course.
Oceanside Cablevision eventually ceased all support for Channel 3, and community television disappeared from Oceanside. Eventually, Times Mirror or Dimension Cable bought out Oceanside Cablevision and signed a new franchise agreement with the city of Oceanside. In 1982, a small group of Oceanside volunteers, spearheaded by Bob Bowditch, began videotaping Oceanside City Council meetings in order to bring local government closer to the people. And out of that small beginning grew Oceanside Community Television. Now, when we look back on Channel 3 programs, they don't seem that sophisticated, but in fact, for the time, they were almost state-of-the-art. But more important than the technological advances that KOCT now enjoys is the legacy of community television that we have inherited from little old Channel 3. In an age where the mass media is being increasingly dominated by a few corporate giants, it's fortunate that Oceanside has a channel dedicated to serve the needs of its citizen. KOCT, like Channel 3 before it, captures and reflects the lives and times of our communities. KOCT's documentaries on the Civic Center, the Pier, and now Channel 3 are priceless, not just because of their historical value, but because community TV can help bring a diverse community together. KOCT owes a debt of gratitude to those early cable TV pioneers and to our city leaders whose vision has allowed their legacy to continue. And who knows? In 20 years, our children may be watching a documentary in 3D about KOCT, the Oceanside Channel from the 20th century.
I found the happy side of life. I found the happy side of life.
3 City News with Frank Richards, Joe Perry, and Charlotte Knight. Together they bring you local news, sports, and the weather for Oceanside. That's every day at 5 and 7 p.m. So if you're contemplating getting rid of your old furniture or appliances, remember Joe and Bob's Bargain House.
This man is working. He's testing a new concrete that bends like rubber.
Welcome once again to our Search for More Talent program.
Good afternoon, boys and girls. Welcome to our new show, Meet the Children.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Personality Parade. I'm your host, Dan Miller.
Oh! And Straw has multiple pellets!
Hey, we're bringing it together with people-pleasing pizza at the Straw Hat Pizza Palace.